It's been approximately a year ago when we started to talk about this program. We wanted to do it because never before there was a program like this in the Caribbean. And as a small island, Aruba, Fundación Movimiento Tabida tried to do something. Because we are busy, we have different active agent programs already that we are doing on the island. But we wanted to bring it more forward to all of us here on the island. But for organizing such a big event cost a lot of money. And we didn't have that money. So the first person who we talked to said, no way, Jose, you are not going to organize this because we cannot do such a big event on the island. Then we talked to the Minister of Public Health, and he said, yes, you're going to organize it. We want to thank him. And I want to acknowledge the presence of our Minister of Public Health, Mr. Schwengel. Thank you, Dr. Schwengel, for being with us today. After the reach out of his department, we noticed that more people were interested in helping us out. There was AZV, there was SVB, and of course, one of our most important ones, Sede Aruba. Whenever we knock on their door, they open the door and say, let's see what you have. And they will help us, if it's a good program, of course. Yesterday, it was a full sold out. We planned 150 persons to our program. That was the active program, the program that we had yesterday. And we had 175 persons. Today, we said, you know something? Casa y Cultura, if we have 200 people in here, we are happy. Because we don't want too many people. We cannot afford it to start with. And besides that, it's going to be too hectic to serve lunch and everything for 600 people in here. So we said, let's go for 200. We are glad to say that today we have 350. So, thank you. There were more stakeholders. We had different banks who said, okay, we'll help you. We had different organizations who said, we will help you. And we want to thank them. Because without them, we couldn't do this thing here. Enjoy today. Enrich your knowledge today. Because I'm sure all the speakers that we have today will share the knowledge with us. So we can enrich our knowledge all about active aging. I'm not going to talk all day today to you. This was all for me today. I want to introduce Mr. Peterson. He will guide you through the day. Mr. Peterson, welcome.
You know, it's interesting, actually, that you sometimes think about aging as something that happens somewhere 20, 40 years down the line. And you're not really conscious of that process until it really hits you. And I grew up with my grandfather, who was a local fisherman, pescador local. And every morning I would see him go out to his boat, drag the engine out of his boat, you know, go fishing, haul the pots, pull in the nets. The man was healthy as an ox at the age of 80. And that always kind of resonated with me. So when Mr. Rudy Leisner approached me for this conference about active aging, the first visual I had was about this strong, tall man at the age of 80, going out to the ocean every day, fishing, selling his fish, eating healthy, having a healthy mind and a healthy body, and being physically active with what he was doing. This topic is so extremely important to the island of Aruba and to the Caribbean, for that matter, as we face an aging population, as we face other social economic developments. My name is Ryan Peterson. I'll be your host and moderator for today. It is a great pleasure for me to be here. I would like to extend a special welcome, of course, to the Minister of Public Health and Sports, our distinguished guests, all the institutes that are here today are part of this today, the organizations, our guest speakers that have come from different parts of the world to share their knowledge and experiences with us. We have a full-packed program on different topics about well-being, health, words I can't even pronounce. You know, I'm just a simple economist, so don't ask me any difficult questions during the day. I'll get to do that part. So again, a great pleasure, an honor to see so many people here this morning for the first Caribbean Active Aging Congress. To introduce the first speaker, and along the lines of physical activity and the outdoors, he holds a bachelor in physical education at the University of Rio de Janeiro and completed his master's in physical education in 1991 at the School of Physical Education of the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. In 1998, he obtained his doctorate at the Institute of Physical Education and Kinesiotherapy at the Free University of Brussels and developed research and postdoctoral internship at the Department of Kinesiology of the University of Connecticut. He is currently an associate professor at the University of Rio de Janeiro and full professor at the graduate program in physical activity sciences at the University Salgado de Oliveira, being since 2016 vice director of the Third Age Open University at the UERJ. He founded and coordinates the Laboratory of Physical Activity and Health Promotion at the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro. He was a member of the National Council on the Rights of the Elderly between the years of 2004 and 2006, and served as advisor to the Ministry of Sports and the Ministry of Health in developing a national sports and leisure policy for seniors. Ladies and gentlemen, please give Dr. Paulo Farinatti a warm welcome.
There's a problem. Thank you. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Fundación Movimento da Vida for organizing this meeting, the first Congress on Active Aging, and I sincerely wish that is the first of many of congresses. It's really a nice topic. It's really a great investment, and you know that sometimes it's easy to begin something, but to make another event, it's the challenge. And I'm proud of being the first speaker of the first Congress. Somehow I'm part of the history already, and would like to thank Mr. Rudy Leisner and his team for having me and my family in this beautiful island of Aruba, and hope that we can spend a good time together talking about alternative approaches of exercise prescription for the elderly. I'm talking about outdoor programs. So I come from Brazil. Brazil is a big country in South America. I don't know if you can see much here, but next please. So Brazil is here, I promise you. And so Brazil is a big country and is a federation of states. Rio de Janeiro is one of the smallest states in the East Coast, and which capital is Rio de Janeiro City, which falls from the screen is here. So Rio de Janeiro City is here. So Rio de Janeiro is surrounded by mountains and the ocean and lakes, and is a big city. It's a city of 5 million inhabitants. So it's a challenge to make programs, exercise programs for these people. But although Rio is a big city, it has a lot of outdoor spaces where we can run programs, exercise programs for all ages. And more recently, it has been an investment of the city mayor in promoting outdoor physical activity for aged people, for senior citizens, fostering their gathering, mostly fostering their gathering, assuring spaces, social spaces for them to interact. So today, next please, we'll discuss two main objectives. There are two main objectives in this presentation. First of all, to discuss aspects of the prescription of aerobic training for the elderly, particularly the relationship between intensity and volume, because all these outdoor programs, they have a theoretical framework. We believe that they work. The exercise, it doesn't have to be always supervised to work and to bring about effects. So we have to discuss a little bit this theoretical framework, and later to discuss the efficacy of alternative outdoor exercise programs for the elderly in relation to improving functional capacity and promoting health and in general. So mostly when you talk about exercise for the elderly, we have this in mind. So there would be, with aging, a tendency to physical inactivity, and this physical inactivity would lead to detraining, with losses in muscle function and decrease in frailty. And all this altogether would lead to a lack of independence for activities of daily living. So elderly people, senior citizens, would progressively lose their capacity to do what they consider important for themselves. And they would lack independence for the basic activities of daily living. In consequence, there would be lower motivation and self-esteem, with higher anxiety and depression, more physical inactivity, and this vicious circle would be on and on, leading people, aged people, to be away of society. So that's what we mean, that's what we keep in mind when we talk about physical activity for aged people. This is not so true today. Most of the discussions about sedentarism are not framed by this negative point of view. Next. This negative point of view leaded in the past, and not a far away past. This event was in 1995 in France, and there was an event about physical activity, aging, and health. And that's the image that they conveyed about elderly that practice physical activity. This guy here seems everything but happy. So when you talked about physical activity for elderly people, we worked with a negative image of aging. This negative image of aging is being overcome. It's being overcome. And now, so we have a lot of examples, and I think that this event is one of them. I have heard a lot about the workshops yesterday, and a more positive image of aging has been conveyed everywhere in the world. So when we talk about aged people, we talk about people that are more participative of society and continue to practice, continue to perform activities that they consider important to realize, to fulfill them as human beings. We are not treating people with exercise. I don't like too much this exercise is medicine. For me, exercise is not medicine. We take medicine when we are ill, and when the symptoms are away, we just stop taking medicine. For me, exercise must be fun. Exercise is fun, exercise is not medicine. That's the way we keep regular practicing physical activity. So we have to keep that in mind when we convey, when you propose exercise programs for the elderly. So my agenda as a health professional is to prevent those losses that are shown in the previous slide. But that's my agenda as a health professional. When I present physical activities for any people, and the elderly are not an exception, I have to consider what is important for them, what is important for them to motivate them to practice physical activities. So this is, for me, a baseline principle of any exercise prescription program that we try to present for people, for senior citizens. Next, please. We can't see much here, but this is an interesting paper that has published in Lancet a few years ago, in 2012. And it worked with motivation. So it tried to discuss this topic. Why are some people physically active and others not? And they discussed how people are motivated from childhood to the elderly towards physical activity. Motivations are different. So when you prepare, when you design a program for children to be physically active, for young adults to be physically active, the approach cannot be the same that you have to the elderly. I'll give you an example, strength training. Strength training for young adults, the motivations are different. It's difficult to have a senior citizen of 75 years old that want to have an arm like this. Please, professor, I want to have a biceps of 48 centimeters. But it's usually, it's common when you're young. So the motivations are different. And if you don't consider that, you don't succeed. You don't succeed. So first of all, if we are willing to engage elderly citizens in outdoor programs, you have to assure that those outdoor programs are going in the direction of their motivations. So a few years ago, I proposed a model that tried to make a bridge between aging, autonomy, and physical activity and quality of life. And this model worked with 3 levels of fitness: physical, functional, and psychosocial. So the physical fitness would be related to the physical qualities that we usually work with: strength, aerobic capacity, flexibility, good weight, and this kind of thing. This is important to assure that people can perform the activities they're willing to perform. So the autonomy of action or functional independence are based on these physical qualities, depend on these physical qualities. So the functional fitness would be the capacity to do what you want to do. And you have the psychosocial fitness, so the social insertion through physical activity. For instance, if I like to dance, I have to be capable to dance, and I have to be strengthened enough. I have to be, I have to have enough cardiorespiratory capacity to dance. But if I interact through dancing, it's important for my psychosocial fitness. So all these levels of fitness are interrelated, are related. But when we work with elderly people, from my experience at our university, we have a program of physical activity for the elderly since 1989. Mostly, when elderly people search for physical activity programs, they are interested in this direction, from this to this, and mainly on social insertion through physical activity. They want to meet other people of same age, same values, same rememberings, that remember the same songs, that have the same problems as any one of us, If a person of 20 years old goes to practice any sports, anywhere, and find there only people with 50 years old and more, they will be unmotivated, and probably he will look for his group, his age group. This is the same thing for the elderly. The problem with the elderly, and I'm not joking, is that their group are diminishing. And not because they are dying or something like this. It's that because spaces for them to interact lack. You have much more spaces for young people than for the elderly people. And when the elderly people have to compete for spaces with younger people, they frequently withdraw. They don't compete. So we have to assure spaces for elderly people if you want them to engage in outdoor programs. First of all, you don't have to put them to compete with younger people. They are not so respectful toward the elderly as we would like them to be. They are spacious, they have more strength, so they occupy the spaces and the elderly people frequently withdraw. So if you want to propose physical activity programs for the elderly, you have to take this into consideration. You have to provide them a social and a physical space for them to interact with those with same age and same values. Next, please. Given that, and taking this in mind, we can begin to talk about their work capacity. Because if you want to do that, you have, okay, I want to provide them with a space to interact. But does this kind of program work in improving their condition? That's my agenda as health professional. I have to respect their motivation. My agenda as health professional is to improve their condition. Now, does this kind of activity improve their condition? So let's talk about the work capacity in the elderly. How does it evolve? So I think that will be easy for us to agree with that the aerobic capacity, the physical capacity during along aging decreases. So we have a decrease of about 10–20% per decade after 50 years old. And you have a minimum for independence. So independence would be to leave home and make a round on the block by your own and come back home. So this minimum for independence, when you have 70 years old, about 8 years old, we are frequently below this minimum. So you have to give people conditions to continue to perform the activities that they consider important. And you see here, this is the line for sedentary people, and this is the line for active people. So active people, they reach this minimum for independence way later than those who are sedentary, who are inactive. So to provide conditions for them to be in physical activity is to preserve their capacity to continue performing what they consider important for them. Please. And, in hemodynamic terms, we know that this physical capacity is closely related to what we call cardiac output. What is it, the cardiac output? It's the capacity that your heart have to pump blood into the circulation. So the more your heart pumps blood into the circulation, the higher your capacity. And you see, when you have a higher cardiac output, you'll also have a higher oxygen uptake. And the higher your oxygen uptake, the more you can do. The oxygen uptake necessary to perform any activity is determined only by the activity. So if I have a capacity that's like this, and to climb stairs, I need this, I just don't climb the stairs. If I'm here, I climb the stairs with difficulty. If I'm here, I don't climb the stairs. So the activity determines the amount of oxygen uptake you need to perform a given activity. So you have to keep this capacity high to continue doing what you want to do. Next, please. However, to have a higher cardiac output, the cardiac output depends on two variables, the stroke volume and the heart rate. This is the stroke volume in the aged people during activities of increased intensity. We see that the stroke volume, it interrupts, it stops increasing in about 50% of the maximal capacity of exercise. So after moderate activity, you also reach your maximum stroke volume. So you would depend only on your heart rate to increase the cardiac output. The major problem with elderly people when they perform exercise is that they are not capable to increase the heart rate anymore. So the heart rate, the maximum heart rate of younger people is higher than the maximum heart rate of elderly people. If I can't increase my heart rate, I can't reach top, high cardiac output. And I can't perform exercise with higher intensity, So, next please. Differences between older and younger individuals begin to appear. Here we have the cardiac output, believe me. The cardiac output is here. And here we have the heart rate. The heart rate in younger people here in the black dots, and the heart rate of elderly people here in the white dots. We see that although elderly people would depend more on the heart rate to reach great cardiac outputs, they just can't. The heart rate when the cardiac output increases is lower than the heart rate observed in younger populations. And this is the end diastolic and systolic volumes. What does it mean? When your heart contracts, when it's capable to eject all the blood, it's good. When it's not capable, you have blood that remains into the heart. So the heart efficiency is low. So the more you have blood after the diastole and blood after the systole in the heart, the less efficient is that heart. And you see that in elderly people, when the cardiac output increases, the end diastolic and the end systolic volume increases also in comparison with younger people. In short, elderly people when they perform activities of higher intensity, they are not capable to increase neither the heart rate, neither the stroke volume. So they can't increase the cardiac output. If they can't increase the cardiac output, differences between older and then younger people begin to appear in moderate to higher intensities of exercise. Elderly people, they perform very comfortably exercise of light to moderate intensities. When the intensity is too high, they are very uncomfortable and they just stop exercising. And this is a component that frequently keeps elderly people away of the exercise. The adherence is lower when the intensity of programs is higher. That is something that I would like you to keep in mind. Next, please. Next. See very rapidly here, because we can see the slides very well. This is the, in black dots we have the behavior of elderly people in regards to oxygen uptake and its components, and I won't detail that. And here's the behavior of younger people. You see that differences between young and older people begin to appear after 50% of the maximum capacity. After 50% of maximum capacity, the difference in all variables shown here begin to appear. From 50% below, younger people and older people are very similar in the capacity to produce work. That's why, and in Brazil, we see that when you go to the countryside, you see elderly people, you see older people with extremely old age, it then continues to work their fields. But they work with a lower rate of intensity and with more pauses. Okay? So they are capable to work, but they are but not in higher intensities. Another thing that's important in hot environments like Rio and like Aruba, and it's hot here in Aruba, we can feel that, is that older people have a lower capacity of thermoregulation. And that you have to keep that in mind when you practice activities of higher intensities. So older people have lower sensitivity to thirst when dehydrated, and therefore their voluntary hydration is less frequent. They don't drink enough water. You have to push them to drink water during exercise. Older individuals have a slower renal response to sodium in water, with greater susceptibility to exercise hyponatremia, and so they can suffer more than younger people when they perform exercises in hot environments. So there's another component that I would say that higher intensity activities are not the fit kind of programs for elderly people. They are more uncomfortable and they are more in danger of having problems performing this type of exercise. Next, please. Given these points, how to prescribe exercise for the elderly? And this leads us to the discussion about the intensity and overall volume of training sessions. Next. Next. In short, what have I told you so far? Elderly people, they have greater chronotropic response to a given cardiac output and VO2, so higher heart rate. They have earth lactate accumulation for a given work rate when compared to young individuals, so they feel tired more earlier than younger individuals. They have less efficient thermoregulation with implications on pauses, rehydration, and relative effort intensity. And we have to consider also the implication of the duration and type of activity on the injury risks. So they can get injured easier than younger people. Next. I like a lot these sentences because I think that this kind of resumes what the principle that I'm trying to convey here. So in the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines, the 2010 at least, they say that the art of exercise prescription is the successful integration of exercise science with behavioral techniques that result in long-term program compliance and attainment of individual goals. So this is important. First, the long-term program compliance. It's not worthy that you have an exercise program that is perfectly in terms of physiological frameworks and training principles that people just don't practice. They have to practice. And to practice these programs, to engage in these programs, they have to attain their individual goals. What do I desire with physical activity? Why is this important for me? I'm not taking a medicine, I'm having fun. I'm having fun. The question is, what intensity to apply in exercise prescription? I have you two examples, I'll give you two examples to defend a point of view. Let's see some evidence of aerobic training to sedentary people. Next, which is frequently the case of elderly citizens. Here we have people with different physical conditions, the poor fitness to high fitness, and we have the effects upon the oxygen uptake, the work capacity of light, moderate, and vigorous activity. Evidently, when we practice vigorous activity, the results are better. But it does not mean that practicing moderate or even light activities that did those results here, that those results will not appear. We can have results with activities of lower intensity. Next. Here is a study that proposed isocaloric, so exercise with the same volume with different intensities. So you have the lower to the higher intensities. I will not detail this slide because they're not seen well. Next. But the important is, evidently, when we exercise vigorously, the results are better than when we exercise with moderate activity. But it doesn't mean that exercising with moderate activity, the results will not appear. We can have results. We cannot, I accept, not the best results, but we can have results when we exercise with lower intensity. This is also true. So that's what we pursue. So when people exercise, the cardiac workload, for instance, is lower than than before the exercise program. That's what we want to do. We don't want to produce athletes. We just want to produce people that will fulfill their needs in terms of physical activity and works of daily living with lower hemodynamic workloads and with more security. They are safer when performed this exercise. We can attain that, we can achieve that with exercise of lower intensity. So the real point here is, would exercise intensity really be that important within exercise routines designed for the elderly? So for me, the answer is no. Next, please. Next, please. And this is an example. This is a work that we performed in Rio. We have got a lot of people, a lot of elderly people with metabolic syndrome, and the risk to have metabolic syndrome. So you see here that the just reason of being physical activity leisure absent, so no physical activity during leisure, increased the risk of metabolic syndrome of in 3.4 to 2.5 times. So nothing to do with the intensity, just to be physically active during leisure. It's already prevented the risk for the metabolic syndrome. Next. This is the relationship between exercise intensity and hypertension. So you see that there's no relation whatsoever between exercise and the decrease of systolic or diastolic blood pressure in hypertensive and normotensive individuals. So for the blood pressure reduction, the exercise intensity is not important also. It's just to practice something. The regularity is more important than the intensity. Next. This is a very good study that was published with elderly people. So you see here, on the top, programs practiced with high frequency and high exercise intensity, the best result, all right. Here, programs with low frequency and low intensity, no effect, all right. But the importance here, you see that programs with high intensity and low frequency, after weeks of intervention, they had the same impact upon the work capacity that programs with low intensity and high frequency. So you can perfectly compensate the decrease of exercise intensity by increasing the frequency. People just perform activities every day, so you don't have to worry about the exercise intensity. We can perform the exercises comfortably. And this is a component that increases the adherence to exercise. Next, please. and I think that is important in this context is what kind of exercise to prescribe. So should elderly people walk or run? This is a question that all the time I'm being asked to. Next. Next. So walking has been recommended as something, as a kind of activity that can reduce a number of medical, clinical conditions. Next. I don't see here, it's on the bottom, but this slide shows that any rate of walking, any speeds of walking can decrease these medical conditions. So again, if you just walk, you don't need to walk briskly or run to have the effects. If you walk every day, probably your cardiovascular risk will decrease as much as if you run every day. I'm talking about cardiovascular risk, I'm not talking about work capacity. But the cardiovascular risk can be diminished by walking programs. And this is important because there is a speed that is called walk-run transition. So in speeds below 6 kilometers per hour, you're probably walking. In speeds higher than 8 kilometers per hour, you're probably running. But what should we do within these speeds? Next. Let me give you an example. Let's imagine a man of 77 years old with these characteristics and the VO2 maximum capacity of 30 milliliters per kilogram per minute. When I prescribe exercise, and it's usual to prescribe exercise within those intensities, for instance, between 65 and 80% of the maximum capacity, it will fall exactly within the walk-run transition speed. So in this case, the senior citizen should walk briskly or just jog, just run slowly. Let's see what data shows. We have published a study about comparing young and older adults that performed running and walking at the same speed exercise in this walk-run transition speed. Next. We see here, and it's a little bit blurry, but I'll try to show you. Here is the comparison between young and white and old groups during walking and during running at the same speed, during 6 minutes. You see that the old group, in many variables that are related to the fatigue, they exhibit higher responses in comparison with younger groups when they run, but not when they walk. So when they walk, young and older people are similar. When older people begin to run, they feel more tired. Next. Next. The same thing happened when we applied this protocol in an actual program situation, an actual exercise prescription situation. They say they walked or run during 30 minutes. You see again that older people, for the VO2, the VCO2, they are always with higher responses than younger people. Next. Next. And here, next, here below is more important, is a variable called an aerobic threshold. So when we are above the anaerobic threshold, you feel so tired that you stop your activity. So you see here that when older people walk, they are closer to the anaerobic threshold than when they run. When they run, most of our sample just could not complete the activity. When they walk, they completed the activity with the same speed, with the same intensity. So this is important too. When you conceive outdoor programs for the elderly, it's better to think about walking than running. They will be more comfortable to performing this kind of activity and will be perhaps more willing to adhere to the program that we're proposing. Next. Take-home message so far. First, possible changes in the cardiorespiratory system can occur at the submaximal level regardless of changes in maximal work capacity improving functional independence. 2. Regular aerobic exercises, even when reduced in intensity and volume, can contribute to the improvement of cardiorespiratory fitness and maintenance of the autonomy of elderly individuals. And last, For similar speeds close to walk-run transition, brisk walking seems to be more suitable for exercise prescription in the elderly than slow running. So let's move from theory to practice. Next. Next. Let's take this theoretical framework and try to apply it to alternative exercise programs for older people. And I'll give you 2 examples of things that we're doing in Rio. Next. The first example is a home-based exercise program that we are conducting at the University Hospital at, where I work. This kind of programs, home-based exercise programs, they have a lot of advantages in comparison with supervised programs. So you need less human resources, you attend more patients, you foster engagement, you contribute to change in habits, and you kind of work with education for health. So the emphasis is on the adherence and the empowerment of people towards physical activity. Because when you have supervised programs, people have to come to you. It's expensive. So you just attend people that live around your training center. With this kind of programs, you can attend people that live everywhere in the city. This is important in a big city like Rio. How this program works? So it was designed for hypertensive patients, elderly patients. It's a home-based exercise. They come to us and they perform, they undergo an evaluation and a control, and then take home an exercise program for cardiorespiratory capacity, a walking program, and some stretching exercise, like this. Next. So they have a basic, next. So you can go on. You have a basic evaluation with a very simple, a very inexpensive structure. Next. And they take home a walk-jogging program of 30 minutes with a target heart rate, joint mobility exercise. They have 2 practices they have to perform at least 3 times a week. And they fill a self-report sheet. They bring each 2 months to us a self-report sheet with the day they walk, with the exercise they performed, like this. Next. Unfortunately, we can see much here, but this is a sheet. When you have the day they walked, the heart rate, each 10 seconds they exhibited, and a grade they attribute to their tiredness. So the higher the grade, the more tired they felt during the walking. Next. And we should see here some flexibility exercises that they practice also 3 times per week. We just teach them how to perform the exercise, and they go home and do that. This is important because they can walk with their dogs, with their husbands, or their wives, their children. They just don't have to come to us to perform the exercise. And each 2 months they are evaluated and got home another program that they can fulfill. So this is important because they are just ashamed to come back without having the sheet filled. So they walk to have this sheet filled, and then we are sure that they have walked 3 times a week. So we are not concerned with the intensity, we are concerned with the regularity. If they walk 3 times a week, probably the effects will appear. Next, you'll see that. So this is an initial work that we have published with the results after only 4 months of program. See what happened with the body mass, with those who walked, with those that didn't. The body mass, the percent fat, the sum of skin folds. Next. And more important for those people who were hypertensive, the systolic blood pressure and diastolic blood pressure, how they decreased compared to those who didn't perform the program. Only 4 months. Next. We have now data after 16 months of intervention. So this controlled clinical trial investigated the effects of 16 months of this home-based exercise program on the blood pressure, physical fitness, and blood metabolic profile among these hypertensive and low-income patients. This is important because when you have low income, the less you have to take public transportation, the less you have to go to somewhere to practice exercise, the better for you. Next. I won't detail that, but this is the control group, and this is the experimental group. And you see here, when you have an asterisk, you have significant difference for anthropometric, for physical fitness, blood pressure, and blood profile variables. We have always an improvement in the group that exercised in comparison with the group that didn't. Next. What's important here? Body mass, a great decrease during 8 months, and stability. Sum of skin folds, the same thing. Body fat, the same thing. Weight circumference, the same thing. A tendence to decrease during the first 8-10 months, and after this, the program was capable to keep the changes that you have attained. Next. And more important, the blood pressure. You see that these people that just walked 3 times a week in a home-based program were capable to decrease the systolic and diastolic pressure during 8-10 months, and then just to keep the effects they have achieved. So this is a very simple program. We've been implanting this program in some health, we call in Brazil health posts. So you have a professional, an exercise professional there. They receive the people that want to exercise. They design an exercise program that they take home, and they come back every 2 or 3 months just to check their condition. It works very well. Just me and a student, we attended in this program in a given month over than 200 patients. So it's very interesting in terms of health policies, this kind of program. Next. So, home-based exercise prescription programs, they have practical applications that are evident. Effective for improve anthropometric characteristics, to enhance flexibility and cardiorespiratory fitness, and to reduce blood pressure. They have low cost and can be applied anywhere, and does not require strict physiological control. And why this is possible? That's because intensity is not important. So you can just abdicate of physiological control. The last example that I want to show you, and I have just 5 minutes, okay, 5 minutes. I earned it. After this, I earned 2 minutes more. Next, please. This is a very interesting program that's being implanted by the Rio de Janeiro mayorship. It's called Third Age Academies. It's a program in squares and parks in Rio de Janeiro city. So in 2015, here below, in 2015, you had 230 of these facilities. What these facilities are? Next. Next. They are facilities conceived for elderly, biomechanically conceived for elderly people, and you have supervised activity 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the afternoon, where people go and perform physical activities. So the interesting is that it was very mediatic, it became very popular, and in a few years, next, we had over 4,000 registered participants in these third age academies. So the facilities are like this. So they perform stretching, resistance, and aerobic exercise with duration of about 1 hour. And the important is, it is supervised. Why the supervision is important? Because the physiological stuff? No. It's to assure that elderly people will occupy the space. Otherwise, children and younger people will be there. And so, elderly people just don't go. Remember that I told you that you have to assure the social and physical spaces for them to interact? So during 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, they are sure that the space will be for them. And there will be supervision for them to practice the activities. Next. You have one of these academies in our university. The idea is we try to design programs and check their efficacy, and these programs will be later transported to the squares and parks. So we test what will be done in squares and parks. Next. we have assessed the intensity performed in these facilities. Usually, elderly people, they perform activities with 77%, 75 to 77% of their maximum heart rate in this facility, which is enough for bringing about results in terms of work capacity. So it works, it works. Next. And I'll show just one amazing, for me is amazing results in terms of potential public health impact of this kind of initiative. Actually, we have measured the ambulatory blood pressure during 24 hours in a group of individuals that performed exercise in those facilities in our university. Next. 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 So this is the circuit that is being applied in the squares and parks. So they have aerobic and strength exercise alternated. So they alternate. So this circuit has a duration of about 40 minutes. But after 40 minutes, they have completed the circuit and they can go home. Next. So the aerobic alternated with the next, with the resistance. Next. And in the control session, they just stay there doing anything, just to compare the impact upon the blood pressure. We had a lot of hypertensive elderly people in this facility, and we just checked what happened with their blood pressure just after this circuit that is practiced in the parks and squares. Next. The mean reduction in blood pressure during 24 hours was about 6.5 millimeters of mercury for the systolic and 2 millimeters of mercury for the diastolic pressure. But during the waking hours, the decrease was way higher. So we have a great decrease of this blood pressure compared with the non-exercise day in these people who are hypertensive. So the hypotension during waking hours, 6 to 7 hours after the circuit in the with no stress on the intensity. So I invite you to think about the impact of this next upon over 40,000 registered individuals aged more than 60 years. With a program that is very cheap because since you have the facilities installed, the investment it's just on keeping that. So over 40,000 registered participants that can have a blood pressure reduction like this. Next, when we just consider the waking hours, next, the reduction in blood pressure was of about 13 millimeters of mercury for the systolic and almost 8 millimeters of mercury in the diastolic pressure. In long term, the impact on their blood pressure will be really good. We are now performing a clinical trial to check if this kind of program brings about long-term effects. And I'm ending because he's also on my neck. Next. Next. So the take-home message is, outdoor exercise programs focusing on volume instead of intensity are capable to improve physical fitness and prevent cardiovascular risk factors, particularly blood pressure. And to acknowledge that supervised vigorous exercise provokes greater adaptations is not to deny that outdoor routines performed at comfortable intensity may induce adequate improvements with likely influence on individuals' adherence. That's what I believe. Next. I would like just to thank the funding agencies that have been supporting our research. Next. Also, the amazing people from the Laboratory of Physical Activity and Health Promotion. Without them, anything of this would be possible. Next. And I would just thank you, Mashadanki. Just thank you for your attention and apologize for the problems and for my poor English. Thank you very much.